Well, hello and welcome back to Intermediate Writing. Professor Kent Lee here. Today I'm going to go over the revision exercises from the book that you did in the Google Form assignment recently. And that's the exercise, the samples on pages 100 and 101. One was about the problems of SNS, and the second one was about English Medium Instruction, or EMI. So I took a look at what you wrote in your Google Forms, and then I'll have, give you my comments, what I think of these samples. So let's look at the first one about social media and the negative effects of social media on page 100. Boy, this one is kind of hopeless, I think. Occasionally in the past I've gotten essays from students that were written sort of like this, and yeah. So this is not a student essay. I just wrote a sample kind of based on some poor essay samples I've seen in the past. Yeah, don't do this. This thing is kind of hopeless. It just needs to be really redone. There's so much that's crammed into one paragraph so that it's overly general. It is way too general. It is not informative. Academic writing, like what you do at the college level, should be informative and it should be persuasive. There's nothing here. There's nothing really informative here, and there's nothing that would persuade us. I mean, there's nothing that the writer is really trying to persuade us about that isn't obvious. Obviously, yeah, this stuff is bad. You don't need to persuade us about that. I mean, anybody who has lived in society, I think would agree with these points that this stuff is bad and something needs to be done about it, and even the fact that some education is needed. This would only be informative or persuasive to somebody who's been living in a cave for the past 40 years, or somebody who has lived on a remote island for the past 40 years with no internet access or access to news. This is full of generalizations. There's nothing informative here. Academic writing has to be informative. It has to be persuasive. There's no argument. There's no intelligent, clear argument. There's no main point, no thesis, no clear objective to this writing. It is too broad. It is vague. The solutions are extremely vague. Yeah, the government should do something. Education is needed. Yeah, that's extremely vague. And it's too much for one essay. And there are no sources cited, no examples, specific examples cited. You could write a whole book about this topic. This paragraph, even if it's like expanded into a two-page essay like this is still way too broad and uninformative. To really treat this whole topic in detail could take a whole book. So what do? You'd have to really redo this from the beginning. So what do? Well, take all the bad effects that you want to talk about and maybe kind of write them down, do some free writing, and then kind of cluster them together into several categories that kind of make sense. And then maybe focus on those that you can discuss intelligently and in detail in one essay. So there's a lot of stuff here that's mentioned. Misinformation, misconceptions, fake news, extreme viewpoints, anti-scientific views, popular myths, conspiracy theories, flat earth, moon landing hoax, Illuminati theories, celebrities and politicians spreading false information. Okay, false information about vaccines, minorities, political opponents. That's extremely broad. Write down all of the types of bad information and misinformation. Write them down on paper and then kind of cluster them together, categorize them into several groups, and to decide, okay, what can I focus on in my paper? Because you can't cover all of this probably in one paper. You can't, or at least not in detail, unless you're talking about like general education programs to combat misinformation in general. Then you need to come up with a specific thesis. There are two really different solutions that are kind of hinted at here. You really can only do one. If you want to talk about government or legal remedies, that could be an essay. That could be a thesis statement. And you could focus on that. Or you could focus on education. And then again, you're probably going to have to to decide, okay, what kind of education? Education programs for the general public, or education contents for high school kids or middle school kids, or for college students. You focus on one. So a specific type of education, because there's really so much to do here. So you can present an introduction, and maybe some elements here in this paragraph can be worked into an introduction, but you need to get to a specific thesis. State a specific thesis. The intro should lead to a specific thesis statement, like, while government regulation and censorship are not desirable, individual countries can pass laws that impose penalties for certain civil or criminal offenses, and I'll talk in a minute about what that might be. So not government censorship, but maybe specific criminal violations. Some of this could be defined as criminal, or at least civil violations by civil. So criminal means like the government will or maybe fine you, take you to court, arrest you, like really bad stuff, like breaking the law. There are other things that are civil penalties, and the government says it's not my responsibility to be, but these are kind of guidelines, and if somebody violates this, well, they could be sued. So there are certain cases where maybe the law allows people to be sued, taken to court by private individuals or private companies. That's possible. So you would have a specific thesis, or your specific thesis might be that high schools in this country need to introduce contents in the curriculum in maybe a certain course, or a new course, or in certain college courses, focus on like high school or focus on college, to teach students digital literacy. Digital literacy means being literate about the internet and the kinds of information on the internet. So after your intro paragraph and your thesis, you could present, before you get onto your main points in the body, you can present a background paragraph. And about one or two background paragraphs could focus on specific categories. So I said, categorize things and you could focus on conspiracy theories in your background information, or you could focus on bad public health information or other dangerous information that actually can harm the public. Cite sources. For example, good news sources that cite specific, that mention and detail, talk about specific examples and specific types of misinformation. So you could have a background paragraph or two that focus on specific types. You probably can't cover all of this stuff. You probably can't talk about all of these ill effects, negative effects, but certain categories that are relevant to your thesis. Pseudoscience, bad public health information, vaccine stuff, conspiracy theories, that's kind of broad, but maybe conspiracy theories that are a danger to public health or to the political well-being of our country. When it comes to political conspiracy theories and false information about leaders. In your background paragraph, again, cite sources, cite specific examples, specific cases, data about some of these types of bad information. You don't really need to talk about the history of SNS, because that's kind of it's kind of familiar, and to a detailed discussion of the history of Facebook and Instagram and YouTube and such, it's not really relevant here. You don't need to do that because it kind of detracts from your thesis and your flow of thought. You don't really need to talk about the positive effects of social media. You could kind of mention it if you're talking about, let's say, education policies, and say, let's take advantage of some of the positive effects of social media in order to educate the public. Okay, but you could do that, but you don't really need to explain the positive effects of social media in general, because that's familiar to us. So then you would go into maybe your solutions. So you could write one essay where you focus on government solutions, like certain countries could take some responses. You could do that. So let's say an essay proposing governmental solutions, or I mean not solutions but responses to some of these problems. So the government cannot respond to all of these problems, and you're going to focus on those that are doable. So for example, and maybe this could be a background paragraph too, the government can't engage in censorship for obvious moral and ethical reasons. And you could even talk about countries where the government does try to restrict information, restrict social media, that are bad. Obviously, restricting access to social media, especially general access or for political purposes, to maintain power and control, to protect people from ideas that the government doesn't like, ideas that the government calls dangerous, which are not. That's just not right. That's not moral. It's not ethical. And you can say, okay, you can't do this. This is going too far. The government cannot regulate the expression of personal views and people's political views. And so some of these kinds of bad information, some types of pseudoscience, are motivated by religious beliefs. They're motivated by political viewpoints. And so you can't really go after those directly. Those are people's personal views. And the government cannot regulate satire, parody, comedy. People have a right to express their opinions even through satire and parody and comedy. So if I really think that President Smith is an idiot, I have the right to say that. Or Prime Minister Johnson in the UK, or a lot of, I mean, face it, a lot of political leaders are idiots. So I have the right to say that. I have the right to say I think he's stupid. I think his ideas are dumb. I have the right to say that. I have the right to do so through humor. I could say, oh, the Prime Minister Boris Johnson of the UK is doing drugs. It sounds childish, but if I can make that into satire or parody or humor, okay, I have the right to do that, and the government can't stop me. I have the right to use humor and satire to criticize people. It's different if I'm claiming that, oh, Johnson really is doing drugs. Okay, so then you could outline areas where the government could respond, and I thought of some things that are public danger. Scams, and then libel. I'll explain these. Public danger. So, wrong information about, say, vaccines, public health, vaccines cause autism, or the coronavirus vaccines are bad for you or dangerous, or some kind of crazy conspiracy theories about the coronavirus vaccines. And there's some really crazy ideas out there. Spreading that information, spreading wrong information that harms the public. Okay, you could maybe not ban it, but you could put legal restrictions on it, or at least make it so that people can get sued for that. So there's possibility there. You probably need to engage in really careful legal discussion, because there's a fine line between expressing personal opinion and spreading false information that is harmful to the public. So things that are harmful to the public, that could be one paragraph, that could be a point of one paragraph. Maybe strengthening laws against spreading false information that's harmful to the public good, including false information about public health issues and other public safety issues. Next, scams. Okay, there are a lot of scams on the internet and social media, and some of these kind of go across national boundaries if they're on Facebook and YouTube and such, but you could argue for strengthening laws against scams. There are lots of product scams out there, health scams and fake products that are useless. Obviously, you can make a case for strengthening laws against those. Even though some of these cross state boundaries and national boundaries, you can make a case there. 3, libel. Now, so there's slander, which is just saying something insulting that hurts somebody's reputation. To some degree, that's protected by free speech in most places. Satire, of course, is protected speech. But libel is more specific, and so many countries do have laws against libel as long as they don't violate free speech. Libel is saying something specific that's false and it's designed to hurt someone's reputation. So I could make jokes about how, the Prime Minister of England, is, a drug addict if it's just humor. Okay, it sounds childish, but I could do that. But if I hold up like Photoshop images or deepfake videos and say, here's proof that Boris Johnson is doing cocaine, okay, that's libel. I'm making specific false claims, and then I would be open to lawsuit. So you could argue for maybe carefully tweaking, strengthening libel laws, because that might address some false conspiracy theory claims. So conspiracy theories make certain false claims about politicians. President Biden is an alien lizard creature. Okay, maybe that's kind of crazy, but if you go further than that and make some of the other claims, like this claims that Senator Hillary Clinton is a devil worshiper and operates a secret ring that kidnaps children. I mean, there have been people who have said crazy stuff like that. That's getting more specific, and they're presenting it like it's true information. So you could say, hey, let's sue those people, or let's allow them to be sued. So maybe libel laws and other kinds of false information like that. Okay, that could be one essay. That would require some knowledge of legal and political issues. So that's a more challenging route that you could take to this. And you want to be careful. You want to make sure you know enough about legal terms and legal boundaries and what you can and can't do here. But that would be one possible essay. Another possible essay would be to say to focus on educational programs, and again, focus on a particular target audience, the general public, like through maybe public media campaigns sponsored by NGOs or government agencies that seek to educate the general public, or programs for college students integrating certain digital literacy, internet literacy programs into some college courses, or integrating them into high school courses. So pick a particular target: the general public, college students, high school students, middle school students, or middle and high school students. Pick a particular target audience and a type of program. Focus on that, because you could write several essays on educational programs. Really, you could write a whole book perhaps on ideas for educational programs for the public, and such. Maybe focus on certain kinds of false information like pseudoscience, conspiracy theories, and such. And so maybe you would describe what an educational program would do, and there could be one paragraph where you talk about, okay, characteristics of false information, pseudoscience, and conspiracy theories. That could even be 2 or 3 paragraphs. Characteristics, okay, teaching, explaining these characteristics and how you would teach them, how they would be done in an educational program. Characteristics of false information, characteristics of pseudoscience, characteristics of conspiracy theories. Then educating the public about reliable sources versus bad sources. That could be another paragraph. What are characteristics of reliable and bad sources, and how you teach it in a program. Checking sources. That could be another paragraph, another topic. Teaching people how to check the sources behind claims and statements that they see on social media. And then other aspects of implementation. Who would develop the materials? How would it be paid for? How would it be fit into certain courses or curricula, or how it would be done through like mass media campaigns and such. Those are some ideas that you would consider. Implementation could be like a whole separate paragraph in your essay. So that's how you might do this. It would really have to be completely redone in order to make it into a full essay. Let's look at the next topic, EMI. This is one that I have feelings about because one job I had when I was in Seoul at a university was to help new professors teach EMI courses. They would, these would be new professors, they're newly hired, and they're told, okay, you're going to teach your class in English. You got your PhD from the US, so you're going to teach this class in English. It was kind of a hopeless job for me, I realized. So for example, when I came here to Bugyeondae, of course I'm working in a university in a department where a lot of the business is conducted in Korean. And my Korean is frankly terrible. It sucks. I've always been like, there are various reasons for that I won't get into, but I realized, boy, I need to improve my Korean really quickly. But I can't. I mean, like, when you're a new professor, you're just extremely busy. Even if you've taught before, like in my case, I have to like really revise my courses and like move to a new place and set up, new apartment, new office. I was just crazy. My first year here, I was just insanely busy. I had no time to learn Korean. Now I'm trying. I'm still pretty busy. I think next year will be better, but it's still hard for me to learn Korean. I learn for a bit, and then I get just really busy with stuff. Then I forget my Korean that I've learned. I have to go back and relearn it, review, and it's just hard. So imagine a new professor who's gotten his or her PhD from the U.S., Canada, and they're told, okay, teach in English. Well, that's awful because like your first year or two is just intensely busy already, and it's just even more stressful when you have to teach in English. And they did their PhD. They maybe lived their lives in a laboratory while they were doing their PhD, in North America. It doesn't mean that they're really able to teach in English. So and then for students, I mean, if you're an engineering student, your English is often not that great. And is there a reason to have to take 10 courses in English in your major? No. That does make sense if you're a business student, if you're studying business. If you're studying English, yeah, that makes sense. But it doesn't make sense for a lot of other majors. If you're studying philosophy, especially Asian philosophy, or history, or physics, or biology, or engineering, it doesn't really make a lot of sense, or it's really hard for you. So this paragraph, it's really, as some of you mentioned, it's kind of long, and it does present a thesis, which is kind of in the middle, that EMI should be phased in and adapted to the needs of different majors. That's kind of lines 9 and 10 here on page 101. That right there is a nice thesis, and we can expand on that in body section, body paragraphs. In the intro, I wouldn't really cite some of these statistics. That's maybe better for a body paragraph. But right up to there, that is a decent introduction. But then I would want to break it after the thesis, after line 10 or so, or line 11. The next sentence is not bad. That students majoring in business, English, and international studies benefit more from this. Or that could be moved to later in the essay and just break it here and start a new paragraph. So then I might actually I would break this up, and maybe the next paragraph might explain, or even 2 paragraphs would explain the problems with EMI. And I want to cite specific research, specific problems. And maybe 1 paragraph could be about the students' difficulties. And there's research on the students' difficulties with EMI at various universities in Korea. So 1 paragraph citing specific research about the students' difficulties, and then another paragraph citing research about the professors' difficulties. And actually I've written a manuscript about the topic. I've been trying to get it published, but I haven't had time, because when I did kind of coaching sessions with professors, I found a lot about the problems that they have doing this. It's really hard for them. So and there's other research out there about the problems that professors have, and it's hard for them to teach. It kind of makes it hard for them to cover all the contents of the courses really well. So you could have 2 paragraphs together talking about the problems of EMI. And the main idea is that EMI has been problematic for students and professors where it's been implemented at Korean universities. Next paragraph could be, expanding on the thesis that course EMI should be adapted to particular majors in terms of the course requirements. And so, yeah, it makes sense to have a lot of EMI courses for business majors, English majors, political science, international studies majors. And the students in those majors tend to have better English skills anyway. And then for other majors, the requirements can be reduced and maybe limited to more elective major courses in their third and fourth year, something like that. The next paragraph could talk about maybe relying more on foreign professors and Guildhall professors, and I could cite research showing how that has generally been more effective than just taking a poor Korean person, his new PhD, just got my PhD from the US. Oh no, God, I have to teach in English. Well, the average Korean professor is not ready for that, but if the person is a Guildhall or a foreign professor, it's easier for them. And research shows that students benefit more from that kind of EMI taught by a person who has good English skills. So I could have a paragraph talking about the professors, changing the way that we rely on professors to teach EMI courses. Fourth, I might have a paragraph. I could have another paragraph in the body saying that universities need to gather more input and do more research on this, because oftentimes it's like, a new university president says, okay, we're going to do EMI, and they have no idea about education and language education. Just some university president says, okay, we're going to do EMI, and they don't really conduct research or get input from professors or from departments. They just say, we're going to do it. It'll be the same for all departments and all majors. Same course requirements and requirements for all professors. Yeah, and that's really bad. So a fourth paragraph would be about administration, implementation, getting input. For example, EMI should be implemented carefully in consultation with input from the different stakeholders like professors, departments, colleges, students, parents. That's how I would fix this. You would need to break this up into multiple paragraphs. So in both of these examples, the SNS social media example and the EMI example, the EMI one is fairly good to begin with in terms of how specific it is. The first one, the SNS one, is just awful in terms of the scope or the focus. It needs to be a lot more focused, a much more doable focus or scope. And if you're having trouble with your writing, it could be because your scope is way too general. And maybe you need to rethink your essay and make it more focused, more specific. And in both of these cases, the SNS and the EMI examples, they just need to be broken up a lot. Now, the SNS one has to be really completely reworked, but it also has to be broken up. You need to think about, outline, and carefully plan the different paragraphs, the different sections of the whole essay and the body sections. It's kind of easier to take the EMI essay and to break it up and to develop a lot more. Both of them need to cite sources, relevant research or examples from good sources. For the SNS example, that could include a more professional quality like psychology, essays like I showed you some professional psychology journals earlier. You could cite those. You could cite news reports that talk about some of the types of misinformation and its negative effects, as well as kind of more professional publications. For the EMI, you could cite professional publications and academic research about EMI and its problems and where maybe it has sometimes worked and many times where it has not worked, and why and how to make it work. So these both need to be broken up a lot into separate paragraphs and developed into much greater depth. That it is a lot easier, as I mentioned, to do with the EMI example. You have something better to start with here. The SNS paragraph is just awful to begin with, and it needs to be really reworked. So that's why I really recommend at some point in your writing process, you should do outlining. Of course, yeah, it's good to use free writing methods, different kinds of brainstorming methods, whatever works for you. get in a study group and do some brainstorming together if that helps you, but then come up with an outline. Write out your thesis statement. What is your main point you want to argue? It should be something interesting that you are arguing for. You're trying to persuade the reader about, this is what I want to persuade you. And to persuade people, you need to provide good information, including support from sources, and you need to develop your ideas and arguments persuasively and effectively. You need to do that. And you need to present really specific, interesting points that can be argued intelligently in a paper. So that's why outlining is really, really an important skill for academic writing or for professional writing later on. Even if you're working in a company and you have to write a business report, do an outline. Even if it's just in your head, do an outline first. After you're brainstorming, do an outline. Then write the thing. Whether it's a business report, a case study for your company, a proposal, or something like that, do outlines. Definitely do outlines for your final paper. And I'll talk more about case studies actually in the next lecture or two. I'll go through some examples of case studies. So, use outlines. That's the main takeaway from this. Use outlines. Write nice specific details and main points in your outlines that can then be transformed into a nice, pretty, effective, persuasive, and informative essay. So, good luck with your finals. I'll talk more about case studies to help you in the next lectures or so. So start thinking about that, how you're going to go about doing your final. Brainstorm, outline. Okay, that's it for today. I'll see you in the next video. Goodbye.